everyone. This is Steve Bishop from ProgrammingMadeEasy.com and, of course, Gartman Technical Services. So today I've got another In My Opinion video for you guys where, again, you guys, this is important. This is for you guys. I do these videos for you. And the only way I can do that is if you guys ask me questions. So please, 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 if you have a question that you want an answer to, drop me that question in the comment section below this video. And if I've got time and if it's a good one, I will definitely get to it and cover it. I've got this laundry list of questions already, so I really appreciate everybody who is asking those questions and putting them in. If I haven't gotten to yours, don't stress out. I might get to it a little bit later. Maybe I've forgotten it, maybe I've missed it. I hope I didn't, but I'm really trying to keep track of all of them. And if I haven't gotten to yours, and maybe or maybe I have gotten to yours, and you've got another question, please feel free to ask. I mean, ask as many questions as you want. Okay, it's a bonanza. Feel free to just let loose and let fly. So you don't feel like you can only ask one at a time. So today's question I think is a really, really good one, and it comes from Mustafa Sanji. And Mustafa says, you asked us for what you should do next. How about sharing your expertise in software architecture? How do you begin? How do you make decisions that, yes, this is the right approach? What, if anything, goes wrong, and a way forward towards right direction from a concept or idea to design and development and testing? Then lastly, how do you handle tough customers who know nothing but still poke fingers? Okay, so first of all, there's a lot in that question, and I'm probably not going to be able to cover all of it in this video. I really highly doubt it. In fact, there's really kind of only one subject that comes from that I really want to talk about, and that's something you see up on the screen. If you look on, I've got my Agile project management application open here, and I'm going to go over it here in just a little bit. But to get started with a project, you have to understand that the way that you plan a project should really come down to a simple set of concepts and rules that you want to follow with your interaction with your customer, because they are going to get upset if things aren't following along with their expectations. And one of the best processes that we know of, some of the best rules or guidelines to follow during that development process, is something called the Agile Manifesto, which I've got right here. I'll make this nice and big. Now, a few of you guys recall, or may recall, that I was doing a Q&A session with Bob, Uncle Bob Martin, and he was actually one of the original designers of this Agile Manifesto. Maybe I need to make it a little bit bigger here. Now, the Agile Manifesto is really, really important to modern development. Get my fingers out of the way. So the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, and you can just go online and look up Agile Manifesto, and you can find the same sheet. And essentially, if you look on it, there's stuff over here on the left that's bigger and bolder, bigger font, okay? And then there's stuff over here on the left, or right, excuse me. So this stuff over here has smaller font. It's not as big. And essentially, what the Agile Manifesto says is that these things over here on the left are more important than the things on the right. Now, that doesn't mean that the things on the right aren't important, because they are. Processes and tools, documentation, negotiation of contracts, and following a plan. Does that mean a plan isn't important? Oh, no, of course a plan is important. But responding to change, the ability to respond to the change is more important than following a plan, okay? So that's kind of what it is. And these say, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So those things over here are more important to do, okay? And if we just go through them here, this is good stuff. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And I can shrink this down. My head's already big enough. I don't need it to be mammoth-sized on this. So individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Of course, we're people. The customers that we're trying to develop an application for, they're people too. And our interaction, our ability to communicate back and forth between the individuals are what make a good business communication, a good business network, a happy client, okay, is being able to communicate with them and make them feel like they have your input or their input is important to you. And that's more important than processes and tooling, okay? And if you think about this, just take, for example, I've seen in plenty of businesses where the process in order to get an application developed or a change happens, let's say a customer has some sort of change, well, they contact their sales rep. The sales rep contacts their management. Management goes through another, from the management of the sales department to the manager of the development department, and then from the development department, your director of development, they hand off the new requirement to the project manager, and the project manager finally gets that information all the way down to the developers. You can imagine if you've ever played the game telephone, where somebody says something on one line, and somebody says something to somebody, and then it goes from person to person to person to person until at the very end the last person says what they heard, as compared to what the person said originally. They're completely, vastly different things. Even if you write it down and document it, people are going to have their own interpretations of something, of whatever the work is, okay? So you need to be very direct. You need to have a direct line of communication between the developers. You need to make that as close in proximity as possible so that you don't get all these different interpretations along the way of what the customer needs. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have somebody there that kind of speaks the lingo and knows how to, knows how the software development works and knows how to communicate with the customer at the same time. But they should be more of an interpreter. Everybody should be together. Everybody should be talking together, not this chain of commands that only leads to the potential breakdown in what the customer actually wants. Because you don't want your developers eventually creating something that the customer doesn't even really need, okay? Working software over comprehensive documentation. So if there's a book that's out there called Clean Code that, again, Uncle Bob wrote, and it's really, really great. There's one particular fascinating section on there where it's essentially he's saying you shouldn't be documenting at all. There really shouldn't be any need to be documenting your code. It doesn't mean you don't give a document to your client about how to use the software, but from a developer's perspective, if you're having to document your code, that means that you're probably either not naming something correctly or you're not doing it in a manner that makes it easy to follow what the code is doing, okay? So, you really shouldn't be doing too much documentation other than what's necessary. And if you get into unit testing and you start doing some of your QA testing from that, you're actually documenting the process about how to use the code. And that can be used as a reference later on in case somebody needs to understand how a particular process works. They can go take a look at the tests and see how they're supposed to be able to use that particular class. So really, documenting your code, it's kind of a controversial thing. People say you should be documenting your code extensively, but other people say, there's really no need to. And I kind of think that in a lot of cases, it's a waste of time to be commenting your code because that's a lot of stuff you got to type out where you could be thinking more about what it is you're trying to do. So, but working software over documentation. Do you think the customer wants a big old Bible-sized document about how the software is supposed to work, but it's broken? Or do you think they want a working application and if they need some questions answered, they can call you up and ask you how stuff works? Okay, working applications are far, far, far more important than documentation. Where should you be spending your time? Should you be spending your time finding all the bugs and doing the actual development of the software, or should you be spending that time documenting things? I think that everybody universally around the world would say, by golly, I need to be working on the actual software more than I need to be working on the documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Of course. They want to feel included. They want to feel like their input is important because it is important. It is the most important information you can get. Okay? The ability to collaborate, talk to them, ask them what their needs are, tell them what you're doing. You don't have to get into the depths of, oh, well, I was iterating over a record set the other day. They don't really care about that. What they care about is, what are you doing? What does it look like so far? Does it look like something they want so far? Is it going in the direction of what they want? And the more often you can give them something to show, or demonstration of how the product works, the better. And being able to collaborate, being able to show them that, have their input back in, then you can make the changes. That's the best way to go about it. Now, in order for that to work, though, in order for you to have that passing back and forth of how the product currently works, it means you need to be able to respond to change, right? So that's this last one, respond to change over following a plan. That's the collaboration, right? Those two things go hand in hand. Being able to get their requirements, because they may change. If they have a change, then you need to be able to respond to that. You need to be able to make the change on the fly all the time. And you need to be developing your code in such a way that allows you to make changes easier. That's why the whole inversion of control principles, the solid principles, that's why they're so important, because they allow you to respond to change. Okay, it's very, very important that you build your applications in such a manner. Now, Access isn't so good for this because you can't really implement solid principles in Access. There's some things you can kind of implement, but they're not really, because we have no such thing as inheritance in Access. But there's certain strategies that you can still kind of do some of those solid principles based around that. Now, being able to respond to change. Now, the only way you can respond to change is if you have some way of doing things in small little bites. Okay, because if you plan a project for 2 years or 6 months, let's just take a 6-month project, and that happens all the time. A 6-month project is going to have all these different things that you need to implement. And what happens if during that 6-month time, the client comes to you and says, well, we need to change that? What does that do to your plan? Right? Now your plan's totally, everything from that point on is completely foobarred. You can't use it anymore. You have to start all over again with the planning process from that particular point. And that sucks. That really kind of, you have to go figure out, okay, what's that going to change? You have to go find the other code that doesn't work with that stuff, with that change, and yada, yada, yada. So if you're doing your iterations, if you're doing these projects in huge, gigantic time frames, you're going to have problems because people are going to change. It's inevitable. Change is going to happen while you're doing the development. Nothing is set in stone from the beginning. And that's kind of the difference here between the Agile process, okay, the Agile process, and what they call waterfall. Waterfall is your more typical process where you do these big planning events at the very beginning. You plan the whole architecture and how it's going to be built. You get all your tools and all your stuff and you put them all together, and okay, now this is the plan, this is what we're going to do. And you can even have time frames. You can have resources, you can have time frames, you can have gnats, and all sorts of great stuff. So you can do all you have a project manager who's keeping everybody on task and on time, and what are you doing today? What are you doing today? What'd you get done this week? That doesn't really solve the problem, right? Because you can't be agile. You can't be responding to change if everybody has a task in this particular direction and everybody has to go in that direction, and any change to that is going to cause a problem. You can't have that as the solution, because then you're not responding to change. You're rigid. You have a set path that you've already planned out, and any diversion from that is going to cause a problem. So Agile comes about and says we need to be able to respond to change. And there have been a lot of different processes, different planning strategies about how do you plan your software in order to meet these 4 different goals, okay, the manifesto of Agile. And probably, I think by far and wide, the most popular one is called Scrum. You can check it out. Scrum is really nice. And I have my own kind of version of Scrum, which is what you see up here on the screen. I call it Agile Project Management. It's my own little tool that I built for myself. And it's not really a full Scrum management system. It's not really a full implementation. There's some great tools out there if you're really interested in doing actual Scrum. But there's certain limitations that I have because of excuse me, because I'm only one guy that does a lot of this work. I have a couple of other people that I work with that I do some planning with. They're software developers and they do stuff and I help them kind of figure out how to do things. But for the most part, a lot of the projects that I take on, I do kind of single-handedly. I might outsource some work to some areas or some of my, the people I work with. But for the most part, a project comes to me and I'm the one responsible from start to finish, from the planning all the way through the development and deployment. Okay, I'm the one person that's involved. And there's a lot of great things involved with that. There's a lot of great things because I have total control of everything. But a lot of the drawback is that I can't get things done in a real timely manner. Now, that being said, the whole point of Scrum and Scrum coming from Agile is that you should be doing your software in little tiny fragments, okay, little itty bitty bites, one at a time, okay? That way, if something changes, you can respond to it because your iterations are done. And an iteration has a start, a definite start, and a definite end, okay? Things begin and things are done. And if they're done, that means they're done. There's no more work to be done on them. They are completely, whether that means, and you need to figure out what done means. This is a big point of Scrum and Agile. You need to know what done means. Does that mean, that all the code is done? Or does it mean all your testing has been done on the code? Does it mean your project is implemented? Does it mean that it's been, distributed? What is done? You need to define what done is for you. And once you have that, you have a definite finish point. You have a starting point, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But you have this time frame between when start is and end is. And that's called an iteration. You have a time where you want to get these tasks done in that time frame. Now, each one of these iterations can be broken down. So you'll see that I have an iteration here. And this iteration is pretty long. This iteration is 5 months. And I'll just tell you right off the bat, my iterations are not actually 5 months. This program, this application, is kind of a combination of two things. It is my quote manager, so I can develop, I can plan out a quote. I can give an estimate on how long something is going to take. So you're actually looking at an estimate that I wrote. This is a fake client that I put some stuff together for, and 5 months is not a good time frame to be trying to do an iteration because 5 months, anything can happen in that 5 months. Uncle Bob typically says you want about a week. Your iteration should be about a week. Okay, Monday is kind of planning, the beginning of Monday morning is planning. Friday should be done. Everything is completed and out the door. So that's the typical iteration that Uncle Bob looks for. Maybe 2 weeks, okay, for each iteration. I think a lot of companies plan for 3 weeks to even a month. That's often quite a time frame that they like. But these time frames really depend upon the resources and the amount of features that need to be completed for that iteration. And the whole point is that the end of done, so when we say done, when we say something is completed, not only is it just done, but it is actually shippable. Okay, it may not have all of the features that the customer wants, it may not have everything that they need in it, but it's a working product. It works. You can click on it, it does things. That's, again, this working software, okay, working software over comprehensive documentation. I can send you what we have. It's not everything you want yet, but it works, okay? That is a key component. That is a big, big point, a big emphasis of Scrum and Agile, is that you can have a product completed. It may not have everything on it, doesn't have all the features that they've requested, but it works, okay? And I can send that to you, I can demo it to you. I can send it out to you right now, I can demonstrate this to you, and I can show you what the changes are that we've put in the system. So that helps you with that communication with the client because they're getting a new iteration of the product every week or every 2 weeks or every 3 or 4 weeks. So they're getting constant updates. They can actually see they have something tangible they can work with and play with, and they can then give you the feedback so that the next iteration you can make the appropriate changes. Being able to break it down into these different little bites is really, really important. So you can see on my little screen here on my Agile project management little tool here that I wrote in Access, and this is really just kind of thrown together. This is an application that's definitely not, it's got a lot of rough edges to it. There's bugs in it, like, if I wanted to add a new company or project, it's not perfect. So you can't get this. I can't send it out to you. There's a bunch of stuff in here that doesn't work that I would need to get solved before I could send this to you. But at least this can give you an idea for maybe how you can develop your own application to do something that I'm going to show you here. So we have an iteration, and something that I don't have in here, but I should, and I've thought about adding this, but I actually kind of have it. I'm kind of beating around the bush here, but you'll see all of these features that are part of the iteration 1, okay? And this is what we call a backlog. These are all of the features that need to be implemented, and then I've grouped them into this iteration 1, okay? And typically a backlog is going to have all of the features that you plan on implementing. Now, these are going to change, okay? The features that you plan, the stuff that goes into your backlog is going to change over time because things are going to be added to it and things are going to be removed from it. But every time your client requests some sort of change to a feature, that's going to go into the backlog, okay? Something to keep track of all of the changes that need to be done with the application. And there's a priority to it. You can see that we have a prioritization of all of these different features. What's the most important thing? Well, I need users. Users is the most important thing. And I also want to put user types on there because user types are going to be very important because then I have permissions that go along with those user types. So this is giving us a breakdown of each individual kind of a unit, okay? A unit or a feature is kind of a unit of work, okay? And a feature, this unit of work is based around some sort of design thing that's going to be a part of the application, something that's going to be usable by the user of the application, okay? So some sort of feature that's going to be into this application, and it's written in such a way that we're describing what that feature does, okay? Now, you'll see that when I click on any one of these features, I also have these things called user stories. And each user story is from the perspective of the user of that feature. Okay, so if I am an administrator, what should I expect from the permissions feature? Okay, so if I just kind of open this up, I'm just going to double click on it here, and this shows you all of the user stories for using permissions. Okay. And it says right here, as an administrator, I will be able to assign permissions to the various user types, which will grant those user types access to the different sections of the application. So what's important to understand here is that you are writing your description of how the software is supposed to work from the user's perspective, not the developer's perspective, the user's perspective. Okay? This is doing proper architecture. Because rather than thinking about how I would build a building from the framework to the plumbing to the concrete, blah, 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 those are just different ways. Those are different materials, okay, of how to build something. But if you're really going to think about what you're going to be building or the purpose of what you're building, you should be looking at the purpose of that building from the perspective of who's going to be using it. Okay, as an administrator, what should I be able to do? As a regular user, what should I be able to do? You know, this wonderfully actually ties right into what I use this application for, which is developing contracts, so that when I come out with a quote, the customer can take a look at this, see all the descriptions of what they're going to get as software, and they sign off on it. And now I have a contract essentially that tells them exactly what they're going to get and gives me all of the details of the implementation that I need to know. Now from there, now that I have this thing, and I didn't put together any tasks. But now that I have a feature and I have how that feature is going to be used from the perspective of the users, okay, so who are the different people that are going to be going into this application? How do they plan on using that particular feature? Now that I have that, so I have my permissions selected, I have my administrator selected, the user story selected. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a task for fulfilling the requirement of that user story, right? So let's say I would need to, let's see, this is for able to assign various user types, which will grant those user types access. So I would need to do something like database tables, okay? Create tables in the SQL database for managing user type permissions, okay, something like that. And then how long do I think it's going to take that one specific task? How long do I think it's going to take for me to create a table in the SQL database for managing user permissions? Well, honestly, I don't think that's going to take me more than a half hour. I mean, maybe, and I'm being conservative there. I could probably do it in like 5 or 10 minutes, but now I'm giving myself an estimated number of hours, and then later on I can come back and say the actual number of hours to complete that particular task. And then I can take these hours, these estimated hours, and I can put them together again in that contract that I eventually, let's say I can actually print out my software and consulting agreement. And that includes the amount of hours. It does a calculation based upon my estimate. So that's how it's really, really handy for me, right? Because I have estimated number of hours. I've broken down how to accomplish the user story based into tiny little tasks. How, what are all the different tasks that it's going to take? I got to do more than just database tables. I got to do, if this is going to be a web application, then I got to do model, view, controller. I've got to do, any sort of like layouts or something like that. I've got to do some entity framework stuff behind the background. So every one of those little tiny tasks, I can break it down to what all of those little tasks are going to be in order to accomplish this ultimate goal of the administrator, right? What should the administrator be able to do with that feature of permissions, okay? What should they be able to do, and then what are all the little tasks that get to that point? And being able to kind of do this, break everything down by tasks, okay? Getting more and more granular from as we go. We have an iteration, we have the features, we have each one of the user stories on how they're going to use that feature, and then break it down into what are the little actual development tasks that I need to do in order to get that user story implemented into the application. So that's what I do it for, and then I have this little monthly services down here, which is for stuff if we're going to have to charge on a monthly basis for things. So again, you guys can't really get this application, but I just kind of wanted to show you. This is a neat little tool for me, and I wrote this, and maybe this is something you guys could do. Maybe this is a great little project for yourself. If you're doing development and access, build one of these so that you can manage your own projects just like I'm doing right here. Or if you're doing it in ASP.NET, here's a perfectly good little simple little project that you can build for yourself that'll help you break down your project needs so that you can actually go through. Now again, these iterations, you should be thinking about the size should be as small as you can get them. Okay, I'd say no smaller than a week. I think a week is a pretty good target, but if you can try to get those down, get these iterations down into a week's time frame, that's important. And what I would typically do in this case, this iteration is the whole enchilada as far as I can see, okay? Things are going to change, and really I need to add to this system a backlog of the actual features that are going to be in it, and then from there I would go and create my iterations, but it's just not how I designed it from the get-go. Like I said, there's some bugs in it. But build a backlog of all the features that are going to go into this application that you know of, and then be able to add more of those features later on, into more iterations. You can do another iteration down the road. What I would typically do, though, is I would take, about the first 7 of these, maybe 7 or 10, and that would actually be a new iteration. So I'd make a new iteration here, okay, and put in my cost and if we had an IT budget for it, you know, how much percentage down. That's all for contract negotiation stuff. But, you know, I'd have another iteration in here. Okay, we'll just go with the defaults. And now from here, I'd add my new features, okay, and start adding the other features for this application. And as I go along, and I'd be creating new user stories on how to use that feature. So there you go. I hope that has at least given you guys a process about how to handle the development from start to finish. And really, if you think about this, this is something you can implement even on a project that already exists. If you pick up a project halfway through, you can go through and say, okay, well, what are some of the features that we need? Well, let's start on the next iteration here. What are some of the features that we need to add to this project that already begins? Maybe you need to tackle all the bugs that are in there. Maybe that's the first thing that you need to do. So you get a list of all the bugs, and that's essentially going to be your feature, is, you know, fixing bugs. Okay, and you could maybe make bug fixes a whole separate section instead of the actual project management. So that's something you could think about doing in your own project. But I highly recommend creating such a tool like this so that you can go through and plan your applications in these little bite-sized increments. So there you go. I hope that has answered your questions for the most part, Mustafa. If you guys have any follow-up questions to this, I'm sure you probably do. Again, please drop me those questions in the comment section below this video, and I will be happy to answer them. So until that next video comes out, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.